welcome to Anyone Can Become a Great Communicator. We are on the last of the three major big ideas of this course. This is just the first part of a very extended course in which we're going to deal with a lot of different topics over the years ahead. We want to give to you so many tools that you can become an outstanding master teacher, master communicator, pastor that regularly changes lives in your congregation. We are in part number 3. Part number 1 was the law of learner. It's the most basic and foundation of all the laws of communication that I, as the teacher, I, as the pastor, is the one that is to cause you to grow, to change, to learn. And the best way as a teacher to determine how well I'm doing is the scores of my students on the tests. A challenging thing. Wouldn't it be something if we actually paid teachers based upon their performance in the classroom? Not by what they say, but what their students know as a result of their teaching. Part number 2 is my favorite part of today, and that has to do with how do I deliver my content to my students in such a way that it does cause them to learn. We talked about style or delivery, and we found out that among ourselves, we felt that 80% of the teachers that taught us would be best characterized by being, not intentionally, but being boring. And then we compared two twins, that if these two twin lady teachers taught the same content to the same type of people, if you were boring most of the time, your students would probably get a very poor grade. And then we voted if the person taught the same material, but really learned how to deliver the content in an exciting, dynamic way, what would be the grades? And we said, they would be real high. And then we talked about what are the other things we could change. If we improved the outline, the content, if we improved our relationship with the student, if you even got better prepared as a person, would it change the grades as much as taking away boredom so that the person is focused on learning the content? And we decided, no, there's nothing that you can do that will cause learning more dramatically than upping your delivery. And then we talked about the tools of delivery, that your face is a tool, your hands are a tool, your movement is a tool, your voice is a tool. And we gave you 7 of them and gave you quite a few charts that you could use if you really want to improve. It isn't how many years you do something. It's how much you improve over those years. There's a very famous thing that happened in America about this. There was an opening for a professor at a college, and a lady applied who has PhD, had written various books, and a young person came in who only been teaching for 2 years. And the board of the school interviewed both of them and interviewed students that had both of them as teachers. And much to the shock of everybody, and it got into the newspapers in America, the young man got the job who had only been teaching 2 years. And the woman demanded a meeting with the board of the college that interviewed and said to them, how dare you not hire me? I have a PhD. He only has a master's degree. I have written books. He has written nothing. And I have 20 years of teaching experience. And the chairperson stood up and said, ma'am, you haven't had 20 years of experience. You've had 1 year repeated 20 times. We talked to your students, and your students unanimously said, you are not an effective teacher. So it's not how long you've been teaching. It's not the degrees behind your name. It's what happens in the lives of the students. And I want to flip that really clearly. This is identical if you're a pastor of a church, because Jesus made it even more difficult. He said in the Great Commission, I want you to teach them to obey, to observe, to do whatever I have commanded you to do. Which means, how do I know if I'm an effective pastor? Well, one of the ways is the results of the people in my church, their lives. How can you find out if you're effective as a pastor? You can give out an evaluation form in which it's anonymous, in which you start asking real-life questions at the beginning of the year and the beginning of the next year. You could ask questions like this. On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the best, how would you rate your marriage in the last 30 days or so? How close do you feel to God most of the time? How do you feel like you're growing to be more like Christ? A little, medium, a lot, or not really much at all? How is your finances? How much in debt are you? And just ask them 25 questions without their names on it. And then at the end of the year, come on back in and give the same quiz with no names and compare the two, and you'll know if you're effective. I remember one year, a very good friend named Dr. James Dobson in America has been a leader for the family for, 40, 50 years now. And he called me up and he said, Bruce, we just finished a major research study, and we tried to compare the lifestyle, the behaviors, the marriages, the children, the finances, the sin patterns in Christians and non-Christians. People who trusted Christ, people who go to church, people who read their Bible, and people over here who don't go to church and want nothing to do with Christianity. And we found out that out of 142 different characteristics, there were only 3 that were different. That there was no difference between the behavior of Christians and non-Christians. They watched the same pornography. They had the same percentage of divorces. And on and on and on. He said there were only 3 that were different. And he said to me, I'm really upset. What's the matter? And I said to him, Jim, you might not agree with me, but the Bible teaches the pastor is responsible for the congregation that they have. And Jesus commands them to teach them so that they do what Christ says, not that they know what Christ says. And our pastors have stopped doing that. Our pastors have moved into entertainment, and they've moved into just saying, let me explain the Bible, rather than let me take the Bible and change your life because of the Bible. And they're very different. So these 2 things, the teacher is to cause the student to learn the content. And how do you evaluate yourself? By the grades of the student. What is the pastor to do? To cause you to change your behavior to become more like Christ and do more good works for Christ. How do you determine how you're doing? That's the biggest issue of that question. It's the result. It means, did you cause it or did you not cause it? So now we're on this whole issue of expectations. And this is a kind of unique little tool that you can use. And I want you to come a little bit to grips with the expectations that you have and how they impact you and how they impact the students you teach and the people that you are a pastor for. And if you have your own company, a great deal is affected by how your expectations are regarding your company. Isn't it interesting? If you were to do an anonymous questionnaire of the people who are walking in your church next Sunday and say, what do you expect to happen today? Just anonymously. What do you expect to have happen today? And they filled out a form. What would they say? They would say something like this. We'll start at 11 o'clock. They'll start off with some announcements. Then we'll sing praise songs for 18 minutes. Then we'll take the offering. Then the pastor will read the scripture. Then we'll sing another hymn. And then he'll preach for about 35 minutes. And then we'll sing a closing hymn. And we'll go out the back door. What's missing in that sentence? It had nothing to do with the learner. It had everything to do with what the church did in front, not what happened to them. The person doesn't say, oh man, I can't wait to come in, because every time I come here, the pastor opens up the Bible and I learn so much truth, and God gets I meet God in our church every single week. It's like God is in our church, and I can't wait to come, because when I walk out, I am ready to face the next week. I am more in love with Jesus, and I want to do more for him. You see the difference? This is what church does. This is what happens to the people who are in the church. This is what the teacher does. I go over the material. This is, well, what are your grades? Because you learned the material. Our focus has been backwards. It's not what I do. It's what I do that happens to you. And once you get this, it will change your life. So, I'm talking about this tool with the law of expectation. Do Do you know why I'm sharing this? Because how powerful it's been for me. When I lived through section 2 and saw the dramatic change, I said to myself, I need to master this. So I set my expectations about every single thing that happens like this before it happens. I control my expectations. And I want to talk to you about your expectations. And then in our last session together, session number 8, I'm going to give you a tool that you can use every day that will have a profound impact upon people if you use it. So on the expectations, we want to talk about the expectation maxims. Maxim number 1, expectations exist in everyone about everything all the time. That's a surprise. You don't sit down and make an expectation, you have an expectation. For instance, if somebody invites you over for dinner on Sunday after church, and you go over, and at the end when you're walking out, you say to a person who's in your family when you're away from that house, man, that was not a very good meal, was it? You had an expectation the meal would be this good. And the reality was it was this good. And these two weren't met. And you were disappointed. We have expectations all the time. You don't have to form them. They're already there. I have a cartoon here about the young couple that get married, and she sees her husband-to-be the knight on the white stallion, the shining armor, brings her flowers every day and take her out to meals every other day. And then after they're married, she finds out when that reality sets in, expectations and reality. There's one woman who's losing it because that's what happened to her in her marriage. No, I'm only kidding. Expectations exist in everyone about everything all of the time. Maxim number 2. Expectations impact others, other people. My expectations impact you and ourselves. They impact yourself. And as I did extensive research on this issue of expectations, I found out in the world, until 1890, 90% of every pill that a doctor gave to their patient was a sugar pill. We didn't know the medicine to help you for this disease. And the doctors made all different sizes of pills. If you were really sick, you got a huge pill, and it usually was green. It looked ugly. And the doctor would say to you, you must take this pill every 6 hours exactly for the next 24 hours. You must set your alarm. You must take it. You must drink a glass of 8 ounces. And exactly 6 hours, because this pill will interface with your body and it will heal you miraculously. And the person would say to themselves, oh yes, I'm going to do this. It was a fake pill. But the doctor knew your expectations is going to control your body. So I was teaching this one day, and a man over here starts laughing uncontrollably. And I mean, he kept on laughing. And finally I stopped and I said, sir, you enjoyed that? He says, yes. I said, why? He says, I'm a physician and nothing has changed. I said, what? He said, no, the patient's expectations about the pill is more powerful than the pill. I said, come on, tell us a story about that. He laughed and he said, it happened in the hospital with one of my patients last week. I had him come up to the platform and I gave him a handheld mic. I said, really? Tell us about this. He said, oh my. He said, a woman came in with a very rare disease and was very ill. And there's only one medicine for that disease that there is. And he said, as a physician, I had to ask her, are you allergic to this medicine? And she says, I'm terribly allergic. I can't have that medicine. I break out in hives. I have sweats, and my heart begins to shake, and I get sores over my legs. And he said to her, well, ma'am, your disease is so severe, I'm afraid you're going to have to take the pill anyway. And he said, so I couldn't afford to give the lady the real medicine, so I gave her a fake medicine of sugar. And I said to her, please take this. He said, I was in the other part of the hospital and I got a code red, which means a severe emergency. I ran down to this woman's room she was breaking out everywhere in great big sores. Her heart was pounding and her legs had all these big sores on them. And he said to us, and it was because that's what she expected it to happen. It was a piece of sugar. It had absolutely no impact on anything except she expected it to happen. Oh. So, what's the implications of that regarding your expectations and the impact it has on you and other people? Oh, it's going to be another boring class. I hope I can endure the day. So, it impacts ourselves. There's a very amazing story about a company years ago that hired people to keystroke in information for a census of counting the people in the country and all the things in the house. And they basically said, all the employees said, the most we can do is 550 of these cards a day. That's the maximum we can do. So about a week later, they needed some other people, and they put them in a different room because that room was filled with people typing, and they forgot to tell them that the limit was 550, and if you could possibly do that, it'd be wonderful. They never told him. At the end of the day, all the people they hired typed in 2,200 cards because nobody set their expectations. The whole other group was convinced 550 is the limit I can possibly do. Brand new people typed in 2,200. Why am I teaching you this? It's not just for your students, it's about you. What are the expectations you have about you? Point number 3. Expectations are rooted in the past, influence the present, and impact the future. What do I mean by that? Where do we get our expectations from? We get our expectations from basically life itself. We can take a look at somebody and how they're dressing and how they're acting and form an expectation about that person. We could hear from somebody else some comments about a person and their reputation, and that gets inside of us, and we set an expectation about it. Expectations are rooted in the past, something happened, and they influence the present, but they really impact the future. And I have on your notebook a chart we made to explain this. Across the top, you'll see boxes. That represents the teacher. You'll see a bunch of arrows going between that and a circle at the bottom. And as the circle moves toward the top, it changes until it finally is identical to the box. And I want to show you how this works. First of all, the first box says the teacher constructs an expectation. Okay, how would that work? Well, let's say that you are a teacher of the 3rd grade, and you are getting a coffee with your teachers as 1 year ends, and the teacher from the 2nd grade says to you, I hope you don't get Tony in your class. He is a disaster. He will disobey you. He'll create a ruckus. I hope that Tony is in the other class, not your class. Well, you think so too. And so the summer passes, and you are the teacher, the 3rd grade, and these young kids, little boys and girls, are coming in the door, and you're asking them their names, and they're saying, I'm such and such, and this little cute boy walks in, and you say, so what's your name? My name is Tony. What? My name is Tony. You're Tony. Tony, you better behave yourself, son. Student reacts to an expectation. The teacher communicates expectation through behavior. Tony, you're going to sit right here. And young man, if you disobey, I'm sending you to the principal. Whoa. She hadn't said that to anybody else but Tony. Tony then responds to the behavior. Why? Teacher expects Tony to misbehave. Guess what Tony's going to do? He's going to live up to your expectations. And as he misbehaves, you confirm your expectation. Well, she was right. I can't believe I got Tony. And Tony reflects the expected behavior until lastly, the box that is there, the student conforms to the expectation of the teacher. Put that in your box, in your notebook. Student conforms to the expectation. My opening story to you regarding my expectations of Section 2 is exactly what I just showed you. That is, I had expectations that the interaction of Section 2 would be this high compared to the other two sections. And I expected their papers to be a whole other level of excellence. And guess what had happened? That's exactly what happened. I expected their grades to be better, and they were better. Therefore, I've come away from that years ago convinced there's something else going on here. And I better control my expectations. Now, the psychologists wanted to find out more about this. They wanted to find out if a teacher has low expectations. That is, he says to, or she says to herself, these students are worthless. They're not going to learn anything. They're not going to graduate past 6th grade. Why should I even work hard about this? That's low expectations. If the teacher walks in and says, these students are going to be outstanding, they're going to finish school, and 3/4 of them will go to college and they'll become the leaders in our country. The difference of the expectation. So they wanted to test this, and they did. They tested by setting the teacher's expectations by telling teachers untruths. They told certain teachers that the class you have are the lowest students in the whole school, and you just have to deal with it. And another teacher, they told them they have the greatest students, etc. They set the expectations on purpose. And then what happened is, behind the glass, without them knowing it, the psychologists were videotaping for an entire school year the behavior of these teachers, more than just two, a whole bunch of them, who had low expectations and had high expectations. Then they put the two videos next to each other, and they compared everything for an entire year. They wanted to know what happens with low expectations versus medium versus high expectations. Will it change everything? And I put in my book, The 7 Laws of the Learner, some of the results of a teacher with low expectations. I want to ask you a question before I read these. Does the nation where you live, do the teachers have high expectations or low expectations? Interesting question, isn't it? What happens if your expectations are really low? You will cripple your students. You will cripple your students. Because another teacher who has a whole other viewpoint, a whole other worldview, these students are created in the image of God, as much as I'm created in the image of God. And they have to overcome more difficult things than I've ever had to overcome. And I can call greatness out of them. And they're going to be great. They're going to love my class to death. And when I'm done, not one of them is dropping out of school. I won't permit it. I don't care what happens in their family. I'll go visit their family. I'll help them. They're going to love learning, and I'm going to turn them around. Whoa! What's the difference? The inside secret power of a teacher. So listen to this. A couple lists. I'll just read them quickly. They're not in your notebook, but they make a lot of sense from the study of the research undertaken over years of time to discover how expectations impact teaching. When interacting in a class, teachers with low expectations tend to do the following. 1, wait less time for the student to answer a question. If I have low expectations and I ask you the question, I won't wait very long. If you don't know, I'll move to somebody else. When I have high expectations, I'll give you more time. They will call on students less frequently to answer a question because it irritates them. They will inappropriately reinforce the incorrect answer. And they know it's wrong. But because they have such low expectations, they won't want to teach that person. And they say, well, that's the best they can do. And they, oh, good job. You'll do better next time. And that's it. They'll prematurely give the student the answer before the person had a chance to really think it through. They'll actually interrupt more quickly when the student makes mistakes. They'll criticize the student more often for failure. They'll praise the student less often when they succeed. They'll write less comments on the papers they grade by far than a person with high expectations. They'll fail to give specific or positive feedback regarding the student's response. They'll interact with the student more privately than publicly, and they'll maintain eye contact far less because they have low expectations. What am I trying to show you here? Your expectation changes your behavior without you knowing it. And your behavior affects them. And something that can't be understood through your eye contact, your tone of voice, how much you encourage, how much you praise, is all based upon what you really expect.